Hey guys, it's Christian, and welcome to another episode of the Complete Filmography Review, where I take a filmmaker who's done 10 or so films and go through their filmography and give my thoughts on them. And for this episode, I decided to do J.J. Abrams. I'm a pretty big J.J. Abrams fan. I know not all of his films have been great, but I thought his filmography was pretty interesting, so I wanted to go through it. So without further ado, let's get started. So first off, we have Mission Impossible 3, and actually I really like this one. I know compared to the later Mission Impossible films, it doesn't really compare as much, but I think this is a really good start to this kind of whole kind of reboot of the Mission Impossible franchise, because the first one was pretty good, the second one was kind of but I really enjoyed this one. The fact that J.J. Abrams came onto this one, because I know that there was a lot of different directors that were involved in it. Like David Fincher was originally supposed to be the original director for it, but he dropped out due to creative differences, and then another director, Joe Carnahan, was supposed to be in it, but then there was more creative differences, so he dropped out. And there's like other different actors that were going to be involved in it, but they dropped out just due to like all the production delays that were going on. And then eventually they brought on J.J. Abrams, and he was able to take the helm, because I know like the behind the scenes were that Tom Cruise was a very big fan of J.J. Abrams' Alias show, which is actually a really good show. I haven't seen the whole series, but I've seen a couple episodes, and it definitely has that kind of spy thriller feel to it, which J.J. Abrams brought along to Mission Impossible, which is really, really good. So he was brought on to kind of take the helm and kind of take on the production from there. And I think he honestly did a really good job. I think coming from television, he was doing like Felicity and Alias, which got him the job for this one. There's been a lot of criticism that it kind of feels like a small movie in a way, compared to the previous Mission Impossible movies, where it feels very like TV-esque. I think honestly JJ does a really good job at focusing on the characters a lot rather than the grand action. Like there's a lot of like great action sequences in it, but I think he's really good at doing really good like character motivated drama and action. The fact that we start off with Ethan Hunt kind of wanting to kind of retire from the IMF and just have like a normal family life, and trying to like get married and just live a normal life. We see that opening scene where he's at the engagement party, and he's kind of playing down his job, like his kind of like his fake job, his fake alias job. His fiance's friends are just like, "Are you sure you want to marry this guy? He's kind of boring." But yeah, you really know he's this this spy who's been retired and all this stuff. So I think that's a really good like premise to start off with. Just like right off the bat, we kind of have that kind of in medias res scene where it shows Tom Cruise, he's like strapped to the chair, and he sees his wife strapped to the chair as well with a tape on her mouth, and then Philip Seymour Hoffman's character is like, "Where's the rabbit's foot?" And then Tom Cruise is like, "I don't know where the rabbit's foot is." Like, and then Philip Seymour Hoffman's character is like, "I'm gonna give you 10 seconds if you don't say it, I'm gonna like blow her brains out," and all this stuff. And it's this really intense scene, and really just sets the tone for what's going to happen with the rest of the movie. I think it does a really good job with like the twists and turns in the story, where you don't really know like what's coming. It starts off with Tom Cruise, Ethan Hunt, just trying to retire, and then he gets cralled back in the field by like Billy Crudup's character of like having this whole rescue mission of like one of these field operatives that Ethan actually trained, played by Kerry Russell, who actually worked with JJ on Felicity. And you think it's going to be this whole routine rescue mission that they're going to have to extract her out of this base where she was kidnapped. And then they eventually have the fun action scene of like getting into the base and retrieving the laptops and retrieving Kerry Russell's character. And this whole twist of like she's like placing her hands on her head, she's like, "What they implanted me with something," and then the whole turn in the story of like this IED device that gets implanted in her head and it explodes, and then she ends up getting killed. And that kind of really sets the tone for the rest of the film, where you think it's going to be this fun Mission Impossible story, and then you kind of add that drama into it as well, and then kind of the story kind of goes on from there. But yeah, I really think like the plotting's really good, the action's really good. Kind of like starts off pretty small, TVS, but then it kind of builds and builds and builds, and becomes like the classic Mission Impossible movies that we've seen. Kind of really sets the stage for the rest of the series, like 4, 5, and 6, and then with Dead Reckoning that comes out later this year. JJ, especially with this being his first movie, I think it's really impressive for a debut. You would think that this would be like his second or third film or something to kind of build up to this, but like no, just right off the bat, it's just like boom, Mission Impossible 3. I think honestly does a really good job. But yeah, back to the story. Later on, Ethan Hunt finds out about this little microchip that was sent on this little telegram that Terry Russell sent to him, and Benji, played by Simon Pegg, deciphers it, and then realizes that it has to do with Philip Seymour Hoffman's character, about his location and everything. So they kind of go rogue in a way to kind of find him in the Vatican City and extract him. And we have that whole kind of fun switcheroo scene where, they kidnap Philip Seymour Hoffman's character, and then they put in the prosthetic face mask for Ethan Hunt to make him look like Philip Seymour Hoffman's character. So then you have that scene where they're in the bathroom together, and then Philip Seymour Hoffman's like looking in the bathroom mirror, and then he sees like himself behind him, and you have this kind of like, it's like, is he seeing double and all that? So I thought that was a really fun scene. And then they extract him, and they're like interrogating him, like what's going on, like what are you up to? And then he's obviously not going to be talking, so they try to send him back to the IMF, the bridge scene, and then they have that whole epic action scene, the helicopters coming in, like shooting at Ethan and Ving Rhames' character. And they finally extract Philip Seymour Hoffman's character, and it's kind of like that all hope is lost kind of sequence where it's just like, okay, what's going to happen next? And the whole twist and turn of Ethan gets captured and by the IMF because he went rogue, and then you think that Billy Crup's on his side because like he mouths the location of like where the rabbit's foot is, like it's in Shanghai, and then he helps him escape. And so Ethan escapes, meets up with his team, goes to Shanghai, and have that whole like fun action scene of him trying to figure out how to get from one building to the next, and have like that kind of like swing from one building to the other, and that whole fun action scene. I guess the only like criticism with that is like kind of goes into that building and like gets the rabbit's foot, but we don't really get to see anything. It goes in, the team's kind of like communicating, and then we finally see him kind of like rushing out with the rabbit's foot. It's like, oh, that could have been a really cool opportunity to actually see like what he was doing, like with the rabbit's foot, how he got it and all that. But oh well. So yeah, they finally get the rabbit's foot, and then he's about to take it to Philip Seymour Hoffman because it gives him like 48 hours to find it, or he's gonna kill Julia, Ethan Hunt's fiance. So it kind of creates all that tension from there. So they meet up in that kind of junkyard where he gets like sedated and then goes to sleep, and then we kind of pick up where we left off from that opening scene where he's kind of being interrogated, and then with the whole twist of it actually being the translator that he kills. But he really just saw it just to kind of test Ethan to see like how authentic his reaction is to the rabbit's foot, like if it was real or not. So then Billy Crup's character finally comes in, breaks him out. Ethan knocks him out unconscious, and then he kind of goes after Julia in Shanghai. We have that whole epic running sequence where like it's just like a minute of Tom Cruise just doing his classic running, and then it's just like this whole like really epic pan throughout the city of Shanghai until they get to that kind of like that warehouse location. He sees Julia like all tied up, tries to free her, realizes from that opening scene that he has the chip actually implanted in his own brain, and that he has to use the defibrillator to shock him, to disengage it, and then bring him back to life. And so Julia tries to do that, but then Philip Seymour Hoffman comes in, fights Ethan. He activates the chip, and he's kind of like all punch drunk and everything. And they have their whole fight. He tries to threaten Julia by killing her, and then that kind of gives Ethan the motivation to kind of go after him and fight him off and all this stuff. I guess another criticism is the way that Ethan actually takes out Philip Seymour Hoffman's character. They're like fighting outside, and then Philip has Ethan like on the ground, pinning him down, and then Ethan looks up and sees a car driving towards him, so he like lifts Philip up, and then he gets hit by the car, and there's like bonk. It was kind of like a little cartoony ending right there. I thought it'd be kind of a more of an epic fight, but it's Mission Impossible. I guess you have to have kind of those like comedic on the nose sequences, I suppose. But anyway, so then he goes back in. Chip is being activated. Julia has to defibrillate him, shocks his heart. He gets knocked out. And before she tries to revive him, Billy Crup's character comes in, and then a couple other of the henchmen come in. She shoots them because Ethan had that previous scene of like teaching her how to fire a gun and everything, because she doesn't have any experience with that. So she kills them. Kills Billy Crudup, tries to revive him, does the resuscitation, and then of course, the classic, when all hope seems lost, he revives, and then, happily ever after and all that. They had their previous scene, like before he goes off on the mission, of them being married, just the two of them, and then the witness, so then they're all married. And then, they go off into their honeymoon. He meets up with Lawrence Fishburne's character, who he thought was a traitor, but is actually, an ally. And then it's like, hey, what are you gonna be up to? It's like, oh, just gonna go on my honeymoon and all that. It's like, hey, we need you, next time, we'll give you a call. So yeah, I think that overall it's a pretty fun movie. A lot of good like stunts, obviously Tom Cruise does all of his own stunts. Like I said before, like the epic iconic running shot where it's just like panning and everything, is pretty iconic. And, the movies kind of go on from there where, and, all the other Tom Cruise movies where, he's doing all his own stunts, which, I think, yeah, is pretty impressive, that now that he's like, 60 years old and he's doing like all these crazy stunts and everything, I just hope that one of these stunts don't like kill him eventually and, kind of ends, the Mission Impossible franchise and like all these other franchises and stuff. But yeah, I mean, if he's willing to do it, he's willing to put the butts in the seats, then, all power to him. But yeah, at least for these earlier movies when he was, he was capable of doing it. I think he was maybe in his like 40s doing these movies. So he was capable of it. But yeah, I just hope he slows down as these Mission Impossible movies go on. The special effects are pretty great. There's not really over the top. It's really just kind of used to kind of enhance the story a little bit more. And I mean, there's like some points where, the visual effects are a little bit over the top and stuff. But I mean, everything seems like pretty grounded, compared to like the later movies. Obviously there's a lot of visual effects scenes, but, I appreciate that Tom Cruise, really wants to do a lot of his own stunts for real. Like later on with, Ghost Protocol, where he's climbing up the building, or like Rogue Nation where he's like hanging onto the side of the plane, or like Fallout where, he's like skydiving and everything. It's a testament to like how much, he cares about the film industry surviving, getting people into the theater. Top Gun Maverick, he's actually flying all those fighters and everything. So yeah, so I appreciate that he does all of his own stunts and, all the visuals. He tries to do like for real and tries to have them be like as authentic as possible. Yeah, and then another thing is just, Philip Seymour Hoffman's performance, R.I.P., he's a fantastic actor. Just right off the bat, you just feel that tension from him, just seeing like how much of a threat he can be to Ethan Hunt and to, the other supporting characters. But yeah, his performance is great. Like I said before, I'm not a fan of like how he went out in the movie, his death and everything. But, I think other than that, he's very like dramatic, threatening, imposing. He's probably like one of the most memorable villains in Mission Impossible, besides like maybe like the fifth movie with that villain. Like I thought he was pretty good. But yeah, he's definitely like one of like the iconic villains of the Mission Impossible franchise. And yeah, I appreciate all the work they did for sure. And finally, just like I said before, I think this is like a good kind of like reboot to the Mission Impossible franchise. It's not as good as like, Rogue Nation or, Ghost Protocol or Fallout, but, I do appreciate that all those other movies kind of draw aspects from this movie, because the first two are kind of self-contained, but this one really feels like, it kind of sets the stage for like the future movies, introducing Michelle Monaghan's character and, Simon Pegg's character, and reintroducing Ving Rhames' character, and just having some storylines that carry on throughout the rest of the Mission Impossible franchise. So yeah, I definitely appreciate it for that for sure. And, I think J.J. Abrams did a really good job, going from television to the films, this being his debut. And he did a really, really good job at revitalizing the franchise. And yeah, great job. All right, now we move on to Star Trek. And I think personally, this is probably my favorite J.J. Abrams film. The action, the emotion, the comedy, the visuals, the music, I think all that just really just works. I really feel like, just me personally, this is probably like the peak of his career. Like later on, like his movies are kind of more like hit and miss, but I think this one's probably just the most solid out of all of them, just the most enjoyable, most rewatchable, just at least in my opinion. Right from the first shot, you're just kind of just like sucked into the story. It just starts off with like the whole, Kirk's birth, and it's just like a routine mission from like the USS Kelvin starship, and then suddenly this giant like Narada ship piloted by Nero, played by Eric Bana, just comes in and just attacks it just out of nowhere, because as we find out later on, classic Spock had a mission to save the planet of Romulan by using kind of like this red matter to kind of contain this black hole that was gonna destroy it. But then he gets there too late, Romulan gets destroyed, and he tries to put the red matter into destruction, close up this black hole, but he ends up getting sucked into it and then getting sucked to 25 years later, while the Narada, played by Eric Bana, who was a resident of Romulan, kind of gets sucked into the black hole and then gets sent back in time to the moment of Kirk's birth. So once he's attacking the USS Kelvin, he's actually going after Spock, and then his assistant kind of interrogates the captain. It's like, what year is it? And he says the date, and he's like, where are you from? And then Nero kind of gives the order, and then he gets killed. And then we kind of go on from there of the whole attack of the Narada onto the Kelvin. And then meanwhile, Kirk's mother is like pregnant with Kirk and about to give birth. and in order to give birth, she has to be taken onto the transports to escape, but then someone has to stay behind to pilot the ship in order to stop the Narada from attacking the shuttles. So James Kirk's father, played by Chris Hemsworth, which is really funny watching this, just seeing his acting debut in a way where a couple years later he'd be playing Thor and then the rest would be history. But it's cool seeing him in this little cameo, the whole just emotional scene of him piloting the Kelvin into the Narada to kind of disable it while the shuttles go away. And then we have the whole kind of Star Trek logo that comes up and the title that comes up. But yeah, it's just it's right off the bat, you kind of get action, you get visual effects, you get emotion, and just a great score, and you just care about the character of Kirk, of what's going to happen to him next. Now he has, he doesn't have a father. He's kind of growing up kind of as this kind of rebellious kid in a way. Before watching this movie, I didn't really know anything about Star Trek. I just knew little hints here and there. I had a couple friends who were huge Star Trek fans, who watched the original series and watched all the movies and everything. They were going in it with these super high expectations. And I was kind of going in through with managed expectations. I love that teaser trailer. It just looked like a fun, sci-fi action movie. And obviously it was Star Trek, so it'd be cool to kind of get into that fandom. As I've grown up, obviously more into Star Wars, which J.J. Abrams was more into, which is funny because he grew up loving Star Wars, and he kind of wanted to bring Star Wars into Star Trek, because at first the whole backstory with Star Trek was it was a bidding dispute between CBS and Paramount was about to lose the rights to Star Trek. In order to kind of retain those rights, they had to make a Star Trek film, because as the original movies went on, they're kind of lowering down in quality, and people weren't really interested in Star Trek at the time, so they kind of really wanted to revitalize the series in a way. And the writers, Roberto Orci and Alex Kurtzman, were just coming off of Mission Impossible 3, and they were kind of the hotshot writers at the time. And they worked with J.J. Abrams, and who really, at first, he just wanted to produce the film, he didn't want to direct it. And as they were developing this new iteration of Star Trek, they were obviously inspired by Star Wars, bring that kind of more action vibe into it. And then as they were developing it, JJ was oh man, I'm gonna be really jealous of the person who actually gets the job to actually direct the Star Trek movie. So then he was eventually decided to actually take on the mantle of directing it, and kind of went on from there. I really appreciate what they did with the characters, especially with Kirk and Spock, where Kirk is more of kind of the Han Solo type, kind of the rebellious kind of bad boy, who's always against the rules. But then Christopher Pike meets him in the bar after he gets into that bar fight and says your father saved countless lives on this Kelvin ship. I dare you to do better. And I remember watching that in the theater back in 2009, and just that part just hit me, just oh man, just as just a person in general, wanting to live up to these expectations that you're either your parents or your mentors have for you. And then that kind of have that moment of realization where you really have to live up to your responsibilities. And I love that scene where he's driving in the plains of Iowa, and he looks in the distance and sees the Starship Enterprise being constructed, and that really inspires him to join Starfleet and become a cadet, enlist and everything. I know an inspiration was Star Wars, where Luke Skywalker is looking out at the twin sunsets, and that kind of is kind of his call to adventure in a way. So I appreciate how they kind of use that to kind of inspire Kirk to join Starfleet. And then meanwhile, on the flip side, you have Spock, who's half Vulcan and half human, and that's his whole conflict. That was another thing that inspired me. Just me not feeling I had a place in the world, and having a character to identify with, being pulled between two worlds, where does he belong, and all this stuff. So, and then his whole journey is finding that balance. So I really appreciate Spock, where he's a boy from two worlds, where starts off as a boy and usually being bullied by the other Vulcans because they make fun of his mother because she's human, and then getting to a fight with them, and then him meeting up with his father, and he's saying it's really up to you to find out what path you choose. And then him growing up, meeting with his mother, and saying no matter what you choose to be, you'll always have a proud mother. So I thought that was really cool. And then you have these two characters clashing as they kind of get involved in Starfleet, where Kirk is very much the rule breaker. He bends the rules. He meets up with that kind of green Orion girl to, help him cheat in the kind of Kobayashi Maru test, the test that kind of determines whether or not you can move on from being a cadet and then be put onto an actual starship. So he's kind of like bending the rules, and then, obviously Spock is very like logical, practical, the rule follower, and then they have that kind of whole confrontation where Kirk's being accused of cheating, and then, Spock brings up his father, and, like what would you do in a situation where you had all these people, following you on the ship, and you run into danger, and that whole conflict between them. It's like, do you choose like logic or do you choose emotion? And that's like another theme in like the original Star Trek movies where like Kirk is very much like the bronze, and then Spock is very much like the logic, and then like their whole conflict that they have. I appreciate that they brought that into this movie as well. And the story kind of goes on from there. The whole attack on Vulcan, we have the whole backstory of like the Narada being captured by like the Klingons, and then escaping, and then having their kind of like vengeance on Spock. So it's like, okay, we have to capture Spock and send him to kind of like this ice planet, and then we're gonna have this whole revenge of like blowing up Vulcan, just like I had to watch Romulan be destroyed, like you're gonna be stranded on this planet and then watch Vulcan be destroyed. So he attacks Romulan, Starfleet intercepts the distress signal, and they kind of go out, and then we have this whole kind of like epic action scene of Kirk and Sulu, played by John Cho, kind of going down into the drill to disable it, while the red matter that Nero destroyed, he drops it into the hull of Vulcan, and then they realize that Vulcan's going to be destroyed. So then Spock goes down to the planet to rescue, his mother and father and the other elders. Kirk and Sulu, after falling off of the drill and having that whole kind of like falling scene, they kind of get beamed up to the Enterprise. And then meanwhile, Spock gathers the rest of his family. But then, as they're being beamed up, part of like the rock face that his mom is on top of like breaks off. She falls down and dies, while the rest of the Vulcans are sent up to the Enterprise. And then, another big emotional scene where not only like was Captain Pike, taken, to kind of as like a distraction, he's not captain anymore. Spock is promoted to captain, and then, Kirk, has this whole confrontation with Spock of like, we have to go after Captain Pike, and then, Spock is like, no, that's not logical. Get him off my ship. He gets sent to the ice planet, and then meets up with old Spock, who was stranded from the previous scene, and they have to realize that they have to kind of get off of this planet, meet up with Scotty, get beamed up to the Enterprise, because old Spock's plan is to kind of get young Spock kind of like emotional and everything, and once he's emotionally compromised, then Kirk can assume the role of acting captain. So then they do all that, they meet up with Spock, they have their whole fight, and then Spock realizes that he's emotionally compromised, and then Kirk finally becomes acting captain, finally gets to sit in the chair, because I like how they have that scene of he's sitting in the chair when they're trying to plan what to do about Nero, and Spock walks up to him and is like, out of the chair. He's like, okay. So finally gets in the chair, and we get kind of like the third act of the whole rescue. Kirk and Spock are finally friends for now. They rescue Captain Pike, and then Spock flies one of the ships to unleash the red matter. He kind of launches it into the Narada, but then just in time he's beamed out of the ship. So Kirk and Spock, reunite back in the Enterprise. Kirk's rescued Pike. Spock has unleashed the red matter, and then the red matter like kind of destroys the Narada ship. And then we have that whole really fun scene where Kirk is like saying like, hey, we can't help you, we can assist you, but you're gonna have to surrender. And then Nero's like, I'd rather die in agony than accept assistance from you. And then Kirk's like, you got it. And then he turns to Sulu and Chekhov and says like, fire everything we got, and they fire on the Narada, the red matter that caused the black hole, causes the ship to be destroyed. And then I really love that shot where all the sound goes out, and then it's just the music that swells up, and then it's just like that kind of choral musical sequence, and then the Narada gets destroyed. The Enterprise is about to be sucked into the black hole, but then Kirk kind of gives the order to Scotty to go to warp drive, and then Kirk is like do it, and then Scotty flips all the switches, fly out of the black hole, and then everything's saved. So yeah, it's really, really fun, climactic, epic action scene. And then we kind of wrap everything up. Old Spock reunites with new Spock, and then tells him about, hey, you knew about the future. It's like, you cheated. It's like something that you have to do. You have to take risks in life. You have to, you can't just be logical all the time. This guy Kirk is going to be a really good ally for you, and, kind of break you out of your shell. Switch over to a medal giving ceremony, kind of like an homage just to Star Wars, where, Kirk is finally be able to be captain, goes on the Enterprise, and then they kind of fly off into their 5-year mission. Have that whole voiceover by Spock of like the classic Star Trek opening, fly off, and then, end credits. But yeah, it's just like a really fun movie. Just a lot of great humor, especially, between, like Kirk and, Scotty and like Bones. I think the actors do a really good job at, embodying the characters. Like after I watched this movie, I went back to the original series, and I think they really did a good job just playing like younger versions of the original cast members, like Carl Urban as McCoy, he really embodied that character. Simon Pegg as Scotty, thought he did a great job as well. All the characters, Chris Pine, in his big acting debut, or kind of his career kind of goes on from here as Captain Kirk. I know there's a lot of like controversy of like how he played Kirk, the way that William Shatner plays it. He's like, I am William Shatner, and I play Captain Kirk on the Enterprise. And Chris Pine made a conscious decision, like not to play, not to do kind of his vocal inflections for that character, because it would kind of, border on the line of parody in a way. He kind of wanted to just like have the spirit of Kirk instead of like being Kirk, especially since this is kind of like a prequel, kind of sets up how Kirk is. So I think he did a really good job playing, what Kirk would have been, especially, since this is an alternate reality in a way, something that the writers were wanting to do, where, they want to do a prequel but not have like the prequel rules, because it's like, oh, well, I know they don't die at the end because I see him in all these other movies. So they kind of wanted to have like an alternate reality. So that's why they had the whole time travel aspect to it, where, it would still be a prequel, but now, it kind of shifts off from the main timeline into this kind of like other timeline where, it's the same characters, but they have like different paths that could lead them to, where they end up in the original series and everything. And also I feel like it kind of like frees up the writers and the creatives to, tell their own stories rather than having to be kind of beholden to the lore and everything, which is something that J.J. Abrams was really wanting to do. It just has like a production as well, like the cinematography, this is kind of like the start of the whole lens flare. I know there was a little bit of lens flares in Mission Impossible 3, but with this one, like it's kind of like open up the floodgates for lens flares and everything. And, like the whole theory was that, the future was so bright that it can't be contained, which is what J.J. Abrams said. So that's why there's so many like lens flares and stuff like that. And I remember like reading a story that the editors, Marianne Branny and Mary Jo Marquis, were always like upset with the dailies that came in, because they're just like, why are all these shots like so overexposed? And then you realize like, oh, this is just like a creative choice to have all these lens flares and stuff. So I thought that was really funny. And the fact that, they wanted to update the interior of the Enterprise where it doesn't look like, how it did in the original series. But with this one, especially with modern audiences watching it, they probably wouldn't watch a movie like a modern day, like 2009 movie that kind of replicates the original 1960s Star Trek aesthetic. So they wanted to kind of mirror it to make it look like, like a futuristic Apple store or something. So like everything's like white and shiny and new, and how like in the opening with the USS Kelvin, where that mostly looks like the aesthetic of the original series, where it's just kind of like more like mechanical and just more, kind of like worn down and rusted and everything. But with this one, this is like, bright, shiny and new future. Like I said before, like the editing was great, very fast paced, like a lot of like jump cuts and jump forwards, and you really feel that kind of like that tension and that action and all that. And the visual effects are great. ILM worked on them, who worked on like the Star Wars prequels and the Star Wars sequels, which JJ will get to a little bit later in his career. I thought those were all great. They also made a conscious decision not to use like models that they used in the original series, but really use like updated like visual effects and everything to recreate the starships and all that. The fact that they actually doubled the ship length, where like the original ship, I forgot the actual specification, but it was like like one size, and then they actually doubled it in size, and they kind of like modernized the saucer section or like the engines and all that. And the costumes as well, where in the original suits, like they didn't really look practical, like they were like uniforms and everything, but like this one, instead of having the Starfleet logo on there, it being kind of like a button or something, or they actually kind of knitted it into the actual material. And I appreciate that it's kind of like more like a mesh material instead of kind of like a thin layer of clothing or something. So yeah, so I appreciate appreciate just like all the visuals, all the aesthetics, like how they kind of like modernize them and, just make it more like practical and real, kind of bring into like, I guess, the 22nd century, which this movie takes place. But yeah, I thought those were really good too. All right, now we move on to Super 8, and this is, another good J.J. Abrams movie. I think, this is really, I guess, only like original movie, because like at this point, it's either been like sequels or reboots, and that's kind of what he does kind of later on in his career, just like a lot of like sequels and stuff. But yeah, this is really like his first kind of like just original kind of self-contained story, and I appreciate the fact that this is really like an homage to like Steven Spielberg and all, George Lucas and like all these kind of classic movies that he enjoyed watching when he was a kid, growing up in the 70s. And, the fact that this story is really about, just a bunch of like kids, just trying to make their Super 8 movies and, just enter in this film contest and everything. The fact that, J.J. Abrams like started off, making Super 8 movies with his friends, like Matt Reeves, who went on to do like Cloverfield, and, like Larry Fong, who was actually the cinematographer for Super 8, and, Michael Giacchino, who did the music and everything. Like they all kind of like were this kind of like nerdy band of kids, making out their own like little Super 8 movies. And then I appreciate that he kind of brought that aesthetic into this movie as well. A lot of people I know criticize the movie for the fact that they feel like it's like a Spielberg ripoff. It's like Stranger Things before Stranger Things. I don't think it's necessarily like a ripoff. I think it's, more of like an homage to Steven Spielberg. The fact that, Steven Spielberg was a producer on this movie, it just like gives, more credit to J.J. Abrams for working on it. Because I know that they had a relationship beforehand where J.J. and Matt Reeves were, I think they were like 16 years old. And, one of their first jobs was taking Steven Spielberg's old movies, old Super 8 movies, and like cleaning them up and everything. So that's what kind of started their relationship there. And Steven Spielberg was such an influence to him that he wanted to make a movie that, like paid homage to him. Obviously you can see the references like E.T. and Goonies and, a little bit of like Jaws, which are, some of my favorite movies. So I definitely wasn't complaining when I was watching it. But yeah, I think, he kind of takes those aspects and, kind of like just makes them his own. Right off the bat, has that kind of cool opening shot of like in the steel mill, and, kind of pushes in on that sign that says like such and such days without incident. And then, the guy walks up the ladder, takes the numbers off, and then it's like 0 days without incident. And then you realize like, oh shoot, like what's happening? And I know that was like inspiration for JJ. Like he had that kind of image in his mind for, years and years and years as he was like making movies and stuff. And he didn't really know like what the story was going to be, behind that, but he knew that he wanted that to kind of be the opening shot of like whatever movie he did. And he decided to do it with this one and kind of create a story around it. But yeah, right at the bat, you just find out like all this emotion, and then you realize later on that Joe Lamb, the main character, his mother worked at the steel mill with another character, Alice, played by Elle Fanning. Her father also works at the steel mill, and he was actually supposed to go in, but he was all drunk and everything, so they decided to have Joe's mother come in to replace him, and then that's when the incident happened. So it just creates this kind of like tension between Joe's father, the police officer played by Kyle Chandler, and then Alice's father. So this whole riff there, kind of jumps to the funeral, and you just see Joe outside on the swing set, with a locket that his mom gave him, years ago, and just kind of sets the tone from there. And yeah, there's just like a really just like emotional movie where, due to all these events with this monster coming into the town, this family, these kind of like two families come together. Starts off with, the kids are trying to make their Super 8 movies. It's like the last day of school, and they need like an actress, so they ask like Alice Daner, who's like this like beautiful girl and everything. Joe has like a crush on her, and you realize that Charles, Joe's best friend, also has a crush on her as well. And they they have their Super 8 movies. They have to film on the train tracks because Charles wants to have like production value. So they're filming on the train tracks as the train's coming, and then as the train's coming, they look in the distance and they see like this pickup truck coming, and then it slams with the train and derails it, and it's like this big epic train crash sequence. And I know that J.J. Abrams was inspired by Steven Spielberg, who was also inspired by Cecil B. DeMille, who directed a movie called The Greatest Show on Earth. There's this whole big epic train crash sequence, so it's cool that kind of echoes throughout these filmmakers' careers. Like Steven Spielberg was inspired by that, and J.J. Abrams was inspired by Spielberg, and then he kind of brought that kind of full circle around to this movie. So there's the train crash, And then the kids run up to the pickup truck and they see their teacher, Mr. Woodward, pulls out his gun and is like, forget what you saw here, or these guys will go after you and your parents and you'll all be dead. So now they have to carry this secret of like what's going on, and they realize that in one of these crates that was on the train were these little white cubes. Joe takes one of them, takes it back home, and then the kind of mystery goes on from there. And you also realize that there's this giant monster that gets unleashed into the town, so it's kind of like Jaws in a way. And Close Encounters is like another inspiration as well, where like there's like this weird stuff going on in the town, people going missing, the electricity is kind of like going in and out, people's dogs are running away from them, and showing up in like other counties and stuff like that. And then kind of like these kind of parallel storylines going on where Joe and Charles and the rest of the kids are trying to still make this movie, but there's also this drama between the two fathers that are going on. And then meanwhile you have the military capturing Woodward and trying to figure out like why he was trying to derail the train, because you realize later on that he was a scientist who was working on this project with the alien, trying to free him and everything. So then these two storylines kind of like merge together as the story goes on. And that was another thing that J.J. Abrams was inspired by. He had these two stories like of kids making super great movies, and then like an alien kind of getting unleashed into a town, and he couldn't really figure out an idea that worked for either one of them, so he decided to match them together. And I guess there's like pros and cons with it. Like I personally kind of like more of the kids making their Super 8 films, all the drama that goes on from there. I don't think you necessarily need the alien stuff, but I know that's kind of like, the E.T. reference, like, kind of like E.T. mixed with Close Encounters and Jaws. As the story goes on, the kids find out more and more about this whole plan of like the military trying to capture the beast and everything for research, and then trying to prevent it from reassembling all these cubes to make the ship to fly off. The military kind of like start this field fire, so then the town has to evacuate, but then obviously the kids have to figure out like what's going on, because previously the monster actually captured Alice, so they have to rescue her. They have to find this monster, and the trailer's like, we have to find this thing. They escape. They have this whole plan of meeting up with the stoner character who has a crush on Charles's older sister, so they can get a ride to the school to find like the footage and everything to like prove like what the monster is. And then they finally get to the school, look at the footage, but then get captured by the military and get sent back to the base. But then the monster comes in, attacks the bus, the kids escape, and they finally go back into the town where Alice is, the secret entrance in the cemetery, because previously Joe, was kind of like trying to run away from his dad, and then goes to the cemetery and then hears banging on the doors, so he can't suspect that's where the monster is. So they go back to the town, kind of go through the neighborhood that's being attacked by the tanks and everything, because all the technology is being, going out of whack and all that. So that was like another fun aesthetic choice that they had, where they're kind of like mixing the ordinary with the extraordinary, where in the middle of this kind of like normal town, normal neighborhood, but you're seeing like these tanks and these rockets getting fired off and everything. They go underground. Joe rescues Alice. They confront the monster, and then the monster grabs him, lifts him up, and they have this kind of psychic connection. And then Joe's like, "It's okay, you can just go home." And then the monster kind of peels back like the layers behind his eyes, and you see his eyes kind of match Joe's mother's eyes in a way. And that's supposed to be like the connection that they have, kind of like a human connection, because previously they looked at the footage and Woodward explained that once the monster actually touched him, they actually had this psychic connection. So then they, once the monster touches Joe, they realize, they have this psychic link between them. And then the monster realizes that, Joe doesn't have any intention of like harming him. So he puts Joe down, lets him go. And then, the friend's like, okay, what? Which is kind of what the rest of the audience was looking at, because I remember watching that sequence in the movie, and I was just like, wait, really? What? So I guess that's kind of like the only downside about the movie is like, I know it's trying to be like, I guess, Jaws meets E.T. in a way, and I don't necessarily think it works. I think either, just in my opinion, I think the kids should have connected with the monster earlier on, make it more like Iron Giant or something, and then like kids are trying to help, or E.T., and like the kids are trying to help the monster kind of get back home and everything. So they have a connection early on, and then kind of develops as the movie goes on. Then we have all the chaos that ensues. But with this one, they kind of wait till like the last minute where Joe and the monster have their connection, and then kind of goes off from there. The kids escape, the gravity and all that's being like, caught out of whack and everything. They're seeing like cars float up in the air and all this stuff floating around. They see metal objects kind of shoot forward towards the water tower where the monster is kind of like assembling all these parts of his ship together, which is kind of set up earlier on, where, you know, like Alice and Joe are like watching like their little Super 8 movies, and like Alice is confessing the whole backstory of like why the mom was killed in the steel mill. And then, you know, the little white cube is like shaking on the desk and like shoots out of the wall, and they kind of see through the hole in the wall that shot to the water tower. So yeah, all the characters are like reunited, you know, everything's kind of resolved. The fathers are reunited with their kids, and they're watching, you know, as the ship is being assembled. And, you know, like just about as it's about to be assembled, you know, the locket kind of floats out of Joe's pocket and he grabs it, you know, and then it kind of opens up and you see the picture of like Joe and his mom. And then, you know, the whole like letting go theme comes on, where the dad puts his hand on his shoulder and he's like, I got you. And then, you know, Joe lets the locket go, floats up to the tower. You know, it's kind of like that last piece, you know, the water tower shatters and the starship kind of rises up in the air. You know, like everyone's like watching. The emotional music's playing, you know, Joe holds Alice's hand. They're watching it, and then kind of floats up in the air. So you can kind of have that whole E.T. moment, and, you know, the whole fun post-credit scene of like, we actually see the film that Charles and Joe and the kids were working on, which I thought was really fun, that they enter into the contest. So yeah, I think, yeah, overall, it's a pretty good movie. Like some things like don't really work, some things do work really well, which was another kind of like what I said before with like the criticisms and stuff. But yeah, I think like the horror sequences are good, like the suspense, like especially, you know, the sequences right before, you know, the monster's about to attack someone, like the scene of like the guy kind of like in the cherry picker, and it's like whoa, what was that? And he, you know, sees the rustling in the bushes, and then he gets attacked. Or like the sheriff, you know, going into the convenience store, you know, getting attacked in front of like the gas station area, and then like the monster kind of going after the clerk as he's, you know, like listening to his music and all that. You know, I thought like all that was great. The visuals are great, you know, kind of said before, you know, kind of like brings like the ordinary and the extraordinary together. You know, he does a really good job at bringing in like that kind of old like 1979 aesthetic, kind of like, also said before, you know, it's like Stranger Things before Stranger Things, you know, kind of homages to old Spielberg movies, and, you know, like J.J. Abrams' past of making Super 8 movies with his friends. And I thought that was really cool. With the emotional scenes, you know, I thought he did a really good job with that as well. You know, just like overall, you know, I think when it came to just the human drama and, you know, just the stuff between like the kids and the parents and like the town, I thought that was really great. But when it came to like more of like the science fiction, you know, conspiracy theory stuff, I was like, it's like not as good. But yeah, I thought, you know, JJ did a really good job like directing the child actors. Like they were hilarious, you know, that they're like always like arguing with each other, and, you know, they really felt like, you know, real kids. If you were ever to do just like a movie about, you know, just like this kid, you know, trying to make some great movies, then, you know, I'd be good with that. But, you know, he's big into like, you know, sci-fi and action and stuff. But yeah, we're just totally great. But just for me personally, I don't think it quite worked together. I think if he kind of rearranged story elements a little bit more, then it could have worked out just a little bit better. But I think, overall, you know, I think it's a really solid movie, and, you know, just fun, just one and done, you know, homage to movies that he loved in the past. And, you know, I think overall he did a really good job. All right, now we move on to Star Trek Into Darkness, and this one's like, it ranks lower for me compared to the first movie. Like, I love the first movie, like I said earlier. Like, this is probably my favorite J.J. Abrams movie. But yeah, with Star Trek Into Darkness, it just like kind of just like went down a peg. I thought it was really entertaining up to like maybe like the ending. But yeah, you know, like right off the bat, just kind of reintroduces the characters into the world. The crew of the Enterprise has that mission with this kind of like native civilization, and, you know, the whole conflict of, you know, breaching the Prime Directive. You know, the whole kind of like inciting incident is that this planet is about to be destroyed by this volcanic eruption. So Spock is actually in the depths of the volcano and has to unleash this kind of like device that kind of like cools everything and like stops the eruption. But meanwhile, you know, you have like Kirk and Bones running away from the natives and everything, and they have to get back onto the Enterprise, which is actually under the water. And that was actually one of the images that the writers wanted to have. It was like, wouldn't it be cool if we saw like the Enterprise like rising up from the ocean, and, you know, that would cause, you know, them bringing the Prime Directive. And the Prime Directive is that they can't expose any kind of future technology to these kind of like native planets and everything, because then that would break their culture and everything, where they're kind of like more like primitive and everything, and then they kind of see this like futuristic technology. Kirk and Bones are like running through the forest, like jump off the cliff into the water that kind of takes them to the Enterprise. And then meanwhile you have Sulu and Uhura on the shuttle that's just above the volcano, and they're about to pull Spock up, and then the cable snaps, and then he's kind of like left in there. And then you have the whole iconic line of like the needs of the many outweigh the needs of a few. So Spock is willing to sacrifice himself in order to prevent them from bringing the Prime Directive, which is a really cool theme. That'll obviously come in later, because obviously I guess I'll just go into right now. This film is very much heavily inspired by Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. And spoiler alert if you haven't seen it, spoiler alert, Spock dies at the end of that one. So with this one, they're kind of trying to set up like, oh, is Spock gonna die at the end of this one? Because we're kind of setting up his death early on. But then we have the whole twist later in the end, which I'll get to. Kirk is like, no, we're not gonna do that. Like, we're gonna save you. So they end up beaming him up back into the Enterprise. They're trying to get out in time, but then all the natives who were chasing after Kirk and Bones were like at the edge of that cliff. So then when the Enterprise like rises up and then flies off, obviously they broke the Prime Directive, and then the natives are like all like worshiping the Enterprise. They're drawing it into like the sand and everything. So that kind of sets up the drama from there of like Kirk being brought down a peg, because at first, after the first movie, he's promoted to captain, and then you think, they're going to go on to their 5-year mission, and it's going to be all cool and everything. But then, kind of starts off with Kirk being demoted down to first officer, and then Captain Pike, who was in the previous movie, being reinstated as captain of the Enterprise. So, and then Spock is sent off to another ship. So then you have this whole drama from there. And then, we get introduced to the character of John Harrison. He's kind of this terrorist character. He hires this admiral to kind of blow up this Starfleet facility in London. And then, that's where the mystery starts from there. And they kind of like see the footage of John Harrison escaping, played by Benedict Cumberbatch. Once all the Starfleet officers are kind of in that council area trying to discuss what they're going to do about John Harrison, John Harrison actually flies past the facility and like shoots everyone. Pike is killed. All these other officers are injured, and that's where the inciting incident occurs, where Spock is reinstated to captain, and then Spock is back on as first officer. Alexander Marcus is the one who kind of gives them the order to kind of go after John Harrison, who was spotted on this Klingon planet of Kronos, and kind of go from there, take their ship and like fire these torpedoes down at them. And then kind of like this whole mystery of like, okay, do we use these torpedoes? It's kind of sketchy and all that. So like Scotty kind of has this kind of weariness of like, oh, it's like, do we use these torpedoes? So he ends up resigning. The crew of the Enterprise goes to the planet, confronts John Harrison, captures him and all that. And later on we realize that inside these torpedoes are actually John Harrison's people. And then once they capture him and bring him back on the Enterprise, they realize that Admiral Marcus was trying to use these torpedoes to kind of incite this whole war between the Federation and the Klingons and everything. This was kind of be the spark that started that, because of the whole tension between the Federation and the Klingons. They have the whole kind of interrogation scene with John Harrison, who reveals to be Khan. And the whole controversy with that is that, like as the movie was being promoted and everything, J.J. Abrams and the crew were saying, oh yeah, no, he's not Khan. He's not Khan. He's just John Harrison. So I think that was kind of like a detriment to the movie, where, a lot of critics were saying that people would be more excited. They realized beforehand that Benedict Cumberbatch was playing Khan, but, I guess, they're trying to retain the mystery. So when the whole reveal happens, I guess like, it's kind of like 50-50, where like the people who have no idea who Khan is are like, oh, okay, that's fine. And the people who, love Khan are kind of disappointed, where like on one hand they're like, oh, cool, it's Khan, but, he looks nothing like how he does in the original series, and then, and the movie as well, where Khan is played by Ricardo Montalban, who's a Hispanic actor. And I think Khan is supposed to be, like an Indian descent character. So I know a lot of like fans were really disappointed by the fact that Khan was played by Benedict Cumberbatch, who's obviously a white actor. So they were kind of upset by the fact that, they like whitewashed Star Trek in a way. But I think on the flip side, the writers and J.J. Abrams didn't want to have, since John Harrison is kind of more like a terrorist character, they didn't want to have him be like Indian descent. And, create more controversy, so they had him be a white character. And so I think either way, it just wouldn't have worked. I think it was like the actor who played Sulu, George Takei, who was saying like, it's more important to have, representation in these movies, rather than, trying to, like whitewash everything or, make things like political or whatnot. It's just better to have, just that diversity and everything. And then he said it was kind of like a missed opportunity to not make Khan like Indian descent or, played by a Hispanic actor or an actor of color or something. So yeah, I can definitely see his point, but I can also see, the creator's point of like not trying to make this terrorist character, like of Indian descent, just have more controversy. So I think it would have been cool just to have like just a brand new character, just have Benedict Cumberbatch, obviously he's an amazing actor, just play this really cool, interesting character and everything. But I know the writers were feeling a lot of pressure to kind of live up to, the sequels that the Star Trek had in the past, like with Wrath of Khan just being like the most iconic Star Trek movie, drawing aspects from that movie, which I can see why they did that, where like, it's especially with sequels for Star Trek, it's hard to, be original and all that. So they thought that they just do like an homage to Wrath of Khan and take all the plot points from it and mirror it onto this movie. But it's definitely another reason why it kind of pegs low for me, just because like that copy aspect. But anyway, yeah, back to the story. They capture John Harrison, realize that inside the torpedoes was his people, and that Admiral Marcus was going to destroy his people. So they're kind of like, okay, who do we trust? Do we trust Admiral Marcus or do we trust Khan? And then, just before they, figure out what's going on, the USS Vengeance, piloted by Admiral Marcus, comes in, kind of gives the order to, terminate John Harrison and kind of keep the mission going on from there. But then they realize that this whole controversy of like trying to start this whole Federation Klingon war, and that kind of like the battle kind of ensues from there. The USS Vengeance kind of like takes out the warp drive of the USS Enterprise so that it can't get away. So Spock's like, so we can't fight, we can't flee, like what do we do? So then they have this whole plan of like going on to USS Vengeance and like taking out this kind of like the technology that kind of like restrains the USS Enterprise's warp drive. Kirk and Khan kind of like do that whole space jump onto the USS Vengeance and get in, and then they realize as the story goes on that Scotty was actually kind of stowed away in the USS Vengeance, so he was able to take out the technology. They kind of go into kind of like the main bridge. They rescue Alice Eve, who was like beamed up onto the USS Vengeance, and then the whole twist of like they're trying to take in Admiral Marcus, like place him under arrest and all that. But then, Khan, betrays them, kills Admiral Marcus, takes over the ship. He tries to take out the Enterprise. Then both the ships kind of go down after Kirk and Scotty and Alice kind of get back onto the USS Enterprise. Kirk tries to at least try to manually restart the warp core in order for the ship to like rise again. So, he's in the control room, he's hanging on to like one of the pieces and he's like trying to kick it into place. He finally gets it back into place. The Starship Enterprise, is able to be saved while the USS Vengeance kind of like crashes down into Earth. And then we kind of get the whole kind of emotional scene of Kirk, sacrificing himself. He's in like that kind of radiation room, which kind of echoes Wrath of Khan, where Kirk kind of says that line that Spock said earlier. It's like the needs of the many outweigh the needs of a few, and he kind of does like the whole like Vulcan hand sign, and then Spock does the same thing on the window. Kirk dies. Spock has his whole kind of like Khan scene. Goes after Khan, who survived the crash. They're kind of have the whole chase throughout the city. Spock eventually catches up to him. He's like beating him up and all that. And then Uhura beams onto the little platform and tells Spock the news that McCoy discovered is that, Khan has regeneration blood so that they can like inject into Kirk and save his life. So, fight stops there. And then, Kirk wakes up, he's back to normal. He's alive and all that. So, and yay, they send Khan back to sleep. They place him back into his little kind of pod and everything, and, send him back to his planet. Kirk is reinstated as captain, as of the USS Enterprise, and then kind of goes on to his 5-year mission from there. But yeah, that's just like kind of like what I was saying earlier. It's just the ending is just very kind of just derivative of Wrath of Khan. And I would have been okay if like Kirk actually died at the end, like actually died, and we didn't have the whole subplot of this whole super blood regenerative abilities to bring back, because I know you can't kill off Kirk in the second movie, but because he has to be the captain of for the franchise to survive and all this stuff. But I think it would have been really cool for his character, if he actually got killed. He actually sacrificed himself. Kind of echoing the first movie where his dad sacrificed himself for his crew. But for this one, at the very end of the second movie, he actually sacrificed himself, and the crew can live on to go on to their 5-year missions and stuff. So I guess that was the only kind of downside, is not only this whole kind of happy ending and all that, bringing it back to life, kind of out of nowhere, but also it really just kind of rips off a lot of Wrath of Khan. Isn't really as original, because at the ending of the first movie, kind of sets up, the fact that, the crew of the Enterprise can go on any adventure that they want to and all that. But then for the second one, it's just let's just copy Wrath of Khan and just just copy all the plot points from that instead. So yeah, that's kind of a downside. But I mean, I'm glad they kind of improved, for Star Trek Beyond, the third one. J.J. Abrams decided to do Star Wars instead of more Star Trek, which I think was a good choice. But yeah, it's too bad that they didn't really continue on past Star Trek Beyond, because I know they were trying to do a fourth one where Kirk actually meets up with his father George, and they kind of a time travel adventure from there. But yeah, I'm not sure if they'll ever make that one. So yeah, this was kind of a step down for the Star Trek franchise, and they kind of tried to redeem themselves with Star Trek Beyond, which I thought was pretty good, but they didn't really do much after that. So yeah, it's kind of a bummer that this movie kind of brought this franchise down a little bit, and didn't really reignite the popularity with the films and stuff. I know they have the TV shows now. But yeah, overall I thought it was a fun movie, a lot of great visuals, a lot of great action, a lot of great special effects and everything. But yeah, it was just I wish the story was a little bit better. I know J.J. Abrams was saying they didn't really have a ton of time to really work on the story as much as they could have. So I think they were trying to do this movie just after the first movie, but because JJ wanted to do Super 8, things got pushed back, and not all the actors were available at the time. There was a bunch of production delays, and they couldn't really figure out the story. So JJ felt they kind of had to rush into the filming of the movie without really kind of combing through the script and making sure all the logic and plot points were all filled and everything. So yeah, I mean, I guess I understand why it's not as good as the first one. So yeah, it's kind of a bummer, but I'm glad that he kind of moved on to other franchises and stuff, and Star Trek Beyond could have continued on without him and stuff. But yeah, it's just like I said before, it's kind of a shame, but oh well. All right, now we move on to Star Wars: The Force Awakens, and I think out of all of his movies, I think this is probably my second favorite one. I know not a lot of people love the new trilogy. Overall, I think people at least think the first movie is, I guess, the most solid one. I guess people love Last Jedi, but don't really have to talk about that one. But at least for Force Awakens, I really enjoyed it. I think it was a really good launch point into kind of this new iteration of Star Wars. Because previously, with the prequels, they got a lot of hate and everything, which is totally understandable. But it's funny now because people love the prequels now, and they kind of hate the new trilogy. But I know back in the late 2000s and all that, after Revenge of the Sith, George Lucas was saying no, this is it, this is done, there's no more Star Wars movies, and the brand kind of went down from there. There wasn't really much going on. Maybe the Clone Wars series was going on, but there weren't really any movies happening. But then when Disney bought Lucasfilm, they're hey, the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna make more movies. And George Lucas sold the rights to Star Wars to Bob Iger and to Disney, and which kind of a bummer in a way, in retrospect, because at first George Lucas thought they were going to take his ideas for the sequels and kind of go on from there. But then Bob Iger was we kind of want to make something more for the fan, Kathleen Kennedy as well, so we're going to make something more for the fans. And they actually hired Michael Arndt, who did Little Miss Sunshine and Toy Story 3 to write the script. And I feel he was trying to do more of what George Lucas set out to do with his sequels and stuff for his original ideas. He was trying to balance it out, trying to I guess serve two masters, try to be true to what George Lucas established with his original ideas for the sequel trilogy, and then this kind of obligations by Disney and Kathleen Kennedy and Bob Iger of kind of introducing all these new characters, and then kind of having them meet the old characters. And then originally Luke Skywalker was going to be one of the main characters in it, but then Michael Arndt realized that every scene that he was in, Luke kind of took over, so he decided to have Luke be the MacGuffin of the story and have him at the very end. and it's going to be like kind of the search for Luke Skywalker in a way, where like these two new characters discover who Luke Skywalker is, and then kind of go from there. But then as production went on, he was working on the script for like 8 months, and he said he had to realize that he needed like another 18 months in order to complete the script, which would have been interesting if they actually had like a really like solid script moving forward. Just another thing that gets brought up is that the fact that Disney didn't have a plan moving forward. They kind of just like, okay, we need to rush out, Force Awakens, we bought, Star Wars from George Lucas to us here at Disney, and we need to make a movie as quickly as possible, or we're gonna lose the rights, with all our $4.5 billion investment and all that. So yeah, they kind of had to rush out a script, get production moving forward because they wanted to have it out by 2015, which was originally supposed to be like May 2015, but with all delays, they pushed it to December of 2015. And then, Michael Arndt was taking too long, so then they had to fire him, which was, kind of a shame. And they brought on like Lawrence Kasdan, and then brought on J.J. Abrams because he's kind of like the golden boy and everything. They saw his work on Star Trek. They saw that he kind of brought this new aesthetic to those movies, so they brought him on for Star Wars. He was a co-writer on the script, so they worked on it for. I read that they wrote the first draft in like 6 weeks or something, with another month or two of like revisions. So it's just like, okay, like 8 months working on a script versus like a couple months, and like kind of see the result. But I mean, I think overall, I think they did a pretty good job of like balancing kind of like the old Star Wars aesthetic with like the new Star Wars aesthetic. But I think the only like downside is that JJ's whole mentality is like we have to go backwards in order to go forwards. So it's pretty much just beat for beat A New Hope, which it's kind of like a detriment. Because I was reading about George Lucas's original ideas for the sequel trilogy, and really much more about like kind of rebuilding. Luke Skywalker is trying to rebuild the Jedi Order. Princess Leia becomes the new chancellor of this kind of like the New Republic. And it's kind of the whole rebuilding from there. And then you kind of have the seedy underbelly, like Darth Maul is still alive at this point. This is before like the whole rebels and stuff with him. So he was kind of like this kind of like new terrorist leader trying to like create all this chaos as the Republic's being rebuilt. So I thought, all that could have been really cool. But with this one, it's called Star Wars. So I guess JJ thought, there has to be another war, so we have these two factions of like the First Order and the Resistance, which they don't explain at all in the movies. You have to read all the books and everything and all the comics in order to understand. Right off the bat, it's the whole search for Luke Skywalker. First Order's after them because they find out about this missing piece to this map to Luke Skywalker's location that's held by Laura Santeca, played by Max von Sydow. So they kind of go to the planet of Jakku to find him, but then Princess Leia dispatches Poe Dameron, played by Oscar Isaac, in order to meet up with Max von Sydow's character and like get this piece before him. And then you get the whole kind of opening action scene of the First Order ship landing on the planet of Jakku in the village. Kylo Ren, the big bad villain, Darth Vader fanboy, slaying him down, capturing Poe. But before that, Poe put the little missing piece, little drive into BB-8, the little soccer ball droid, and he kind of goes off in the desert. So, kind of right off the bat, you have very much the beats of A New Hope of the, Star Destroyer going after the Tantive 4, capturing Princess Leia, and then meanwhile, Princess Leia puts the message and the Death Star plans, the big super weapon, into R2-D2 when the astromech droid, and he kind of goes down to Tatooine, another desert planet. So as the story goes on, we have character of Rey, who's like, like a scavenger on the planet Jakku, finds BB-8 after he was captured by, Tito, one kind of like little creatures on the Lugabeast character, finds him, saves him and all that. And then meanwhile, you have the character of Finn, played by John Boyega, who, after that kind of opening battle, he realizes that he doesn't want to be a stormtrooper anymore. And he ends up rescuing Poe Dameron. And they escape into a TIE fighter, and they have that whole kind of fun battle, which, it was really, really, really cool. They have the fun banter. Poe gives Finn the name because originally his name is FN2187, which is like another reference to like 2187, which is something that was in a short film that George Lucas was inspired by, that kind of gave him, ideas for like filmmaking, then eventually into Star Wars, which gets brought up in the series. So they get rescued, but then they get shot down by the First Order and then land on Jakku. And then, he goes to the village where Rey is. During that whole battle, he realizes that Poe is actually trying to get back to Jakku in order to find BB-8, the droid. So then when Finn lands in Jakku and then goes to the village and sees the little BB-8 droid, he realizes that that's one that Poe's going after, and realizes that the First Order's also after it. So then when Finn and Rey actually meet each other, Finn lies to Rey and said, oh yeah, he's part of the Resistance. I'm part of the Resistance. And all that. And Rey's like, oh, I never met a Resistance pilot before. He's like, well, this is what we look like. Most of us, some of us are different. But so they have their whole like banter and all that, and then the First Order finds out about the crashed TIE fighter, so they go after him, and then they have the whole like chase throughout the desert. The TIE fighters are shooting down at them. They need a ship, so Finn's like, oh, well, what about that one? And then Rey's like, that ship's garbage. Let's go after that one. And then that ship gets destroyed, and we pan over, and then we see them go over to the Millennium Falcon, which is like a really cool scene. You hear the classic Star Wars music. They have the whole chase throughout the, I guess, Star Destroyer graveyard or something, kind of going through that. They get away, they destroy the TIE fighters, and they get intercepted by Han Solo and his ship. They have their whole confrontation with other kind of smugglers and everything. They get away, and they kind of have their whole scene with Han Solo, and they talk about like the Force, it's true, all of it. Like, we need to get this droid to the Resistance, and then they realize that they need a new ship, so they go to Maz Kanata's castle, and they kind of like barter with her in order to get BB-8 to the Resistance. And Finn, thinking that he doesn't really belong here, he wants to run away from the First Order, he kind of like flees from it. And then Rey kind of hears like this kind of calling to her, so she kind of goes into like this basement area, then unlocks the chest and finds Luke Skywalker's lightsaber, which they never explained how she got it, but I know there's supposed to be kind of like this deleted scene where we see kind of like this flashback of like Luke's severed hand, because he got it chopped off at the end of Empire Strikes Back, falling through space, and then somebody like grabbing it, and then we kind of, story goes on from there. But they decided to cut it, and actually like Maz Kanata was supposed to go with the characters to the Resistance planet, but JJ realized that Maz Kanata didn't really have anything to do, so they decided to like kind of cut all that. But yeah, right before Rey and Maz have their whole conversation of like, the Force is calling out to you, and you have to realize that your parents aren't coming for you, because the reason why Rey stayed on the planet was because she was always like waiting for her family to come back for her and everything, so she was kind of really resistant about leaving Jakku. And then Maz tells her that you have to realize that your family's not coming back, but you can always like look for a new family, and then that being Luke Skywalker, since she realized that she's Force sensitive and all that. So before they kind of make new plans, the First Order comes down, destroys Maz's castle, tries to go after the BB-8 droid, but then Kylo Ren meets up with Rey, and then realizes that she's seen the map to Luke Skywalker earlier on, where Han, Finn, and Rey were kind of like trying to formulate plans of finding Luke Skywalker. Uses the Force on her, she faints, captures her, takes her up to the First Order ship, and then we have Finn and Han meeting with Leia and C-3PO, and then going to the planet. And then not only does Finn want to go to Starkiller Base in order to rescue Rey, but like also they have to destroy Starkiller Base, because they realize that it's a planet-killing weapon. People joke like, no, they're Death Star, which pretty much it is. Which I didn't really care for. I think it would have been really cool if they just kind of just stuck with having the movie be just about the search for Luke Skywalker, instead of trying to destroy another Death Star. In a way, I know it's like Starkiller Base, but it's pretty much it's another Death Star. Let's just be honest. And they have this whole like mission of like Han, Chewie, and Finn boarding the Millennium Falcon, going to Starkiller Base to find Rey, and kind of go into it, shut down the shields in order for the X-Wing pilots to kind of hit this thermal oscillator in order to blow it up. So we kind of have like these two stories going on. Rey being strapped into her whole kind of interrogation chair thing, somehow figures out like what what the Jedi mind trick is, and then uses on the Stormtrooper to like unlock her chains and everything. So she gets out and then reunites with Finn and Han, who met with Captain Phasma, or as I like to call her, Captain Failsma, in order to shut down the shields. So, and then they toss her in the garbage. And so all the heroes are reunited, and they kind of place the charges all around the different parts of Starkiller Base to kind of detonate it, thermal oscillator, so that the X-Wing can fly in it. But before that, we realize, kind of a callback to a moment halfway through, that Kylo Ren, big bad villain, is actually the son of Han Solo and Leia. And there's this whole backstory of that, the Supreme Leader Snoke, or Supreme Leader Gollum as I call him, tempted Ben Solo to turn to the dark side, and he became Kylo Ren, and then that kind of destroyed the whole family. He destroyed all the kids in the Jedi Temple, and that kind of broke up the trio. Luke became a recluse and went to Ahch-To. Leia, decided to stay with the New Republic and then form the Resistance against the First Order, and then Han Solo went back to smuggling. So this adventure kind of almost reunites all the characters except for Luke Skywalker. But yeah, back to the ending. Han Solo confronts Kylo Ren. He tries to redeem him because Leia said, like, please bring back our son home. Like, no matter what you do, just bring back our son home. So then Han tries to reach out to Ben, tries to bring him back to the light side. But then, obviously Kylo Ren still wants to, become bigger and badder and, get deeper into the dark side. So activates his lightsaber and stabs Han Solo. He falls off the railway and then kind of falls down into the abyss. And then, Chewie, like, shoots Kylo Ren in the side, so he's like in pain and kind of tries to use the pain to get more steep in the dark side. Finn and Rey see this from the balcony. They're freaking out. They're trying to shoot all the stormtroopers. They get away. Kylo Ren goes after them. Activates his lightsaber, and then Finn gets Luke's lightsaber that Maz Kanata gave him back at the castle. They have their whole lightsaber duel. Kylo eventually overtakes Finn. Slices up his back. He gets knocked out. He tries to go after the lightsaber. Tries to use the Force to get a lightsaber, and then just when you think like all hope is lost, like the lightsaber kind of like jiggles a little bit and then flies out of the snow and then shoots past Kylo Ren, and then suddenly Rey catches it, which I thought was going to be Luke Skywalker, which I know a lot of people did as well, but oh well. So now she's Force sensitive and is capable of using the Force and is capable of using a lightsaber. I know they set up with her staff that, she's capable of, handling herself, which, yeah, it was totally fine. But, the fact that she knows how to, like, use lightsaber and handle it, not only handle it, but also go into a lightsaber duel with Kylo Ren, who's like a trained, not only like a fallen Jedi, but also, like a trained dark side user, because I know they don't have Sith in this story. But also beat him because I know they have the excuse like, oh, he was feeling conflicted about killing his father. He was in pain from, being shot at. But I mean, like a couple scenes earlier, you use the Force to like, freeze laser bolts and, put her to sleep and all that. You can't just do that during this lightsaber duel. But anyway, so Rey somehow, overtakes Kylo Ren, and, just before she's about to give the final blow, the planet shakes and then they kind of get separated because the planet's about to be destroyed, because meanwhile, Poe in his X-Wing, gets into the Starkiller base, shoots all those little sport rails around the thermal oscillator. So then the planet's about to be destroyed. Chewie comes in with the Millennium Falcon and rescues Finn and Rey. They fly off, and then somehow Hux and Kylo get off the planet before it gets destroyed. So then he can finish his training with Snoke. So then, yeah, everything's great. The Starkiller base gets destroyed. And I remember when I was sitting in the theater, like some people were cheering and some people were just kind of like just in their seats like, okay. It's just like, okay, literally you're just taking the plot points of A New Hope and putting them into Force Awakens, and with this whole Death Star being destroyed, so I didn't really feel anything during that. But yeah, anyway, everybody reunites back on the Resistance planet, and we get the scene of Leia, walking past Chewbacca, and then, hugging Rey, who she's never met in the entire story, but I know JJ was saying, it's like the Force that connects them. And, he apologized later on the fact that Leia didn't hug Chewbacca, who Han Solo just died in the previous scene, so it's like her ex-husband and then his best friend. So, but then, we get the scene in Last Jedi where they finally hug because, Rian Johnson was actually paying attention to the lore. Out of all, like, the faults with Last Jedi, I think, that was something that I approve of, that Ryan actually did. So kudos to you. And then we have, the whole, like, ending sequence of them getting the piece of the map from BB-8 and putting it into R2-D2, who's been asleep this whole time or in low power mode, but conveniently wakes up when they need him to. So, but anyway, they put the piece into the map and they realize where Luke Skywalker actually is in the whole grand scheme of the universe. They realize that he's on Ahch-To. So they send Rey, and originally it was going to be BB-8, but then Rian Johnson was like, hey, can you actually make it be R2-D2 instead? Just because, Luke Skywalker would have no idea who BB-8 is. So if he sees like, the Millennium Falcon and Chewbacca and R2-D2, it just would work better for the story. So they changed R2-D2. They fly off to Ahch-To, meet up with Luke Skywalker. And I know, again, originally Luke Skywalker was supposed to be like using the Force, and there's supposed to be like, boulders flying around. But again, Ryan changed it because he wanted Luke to be cut off from the Force. So Rey meets with Luke Skywalker, he has this whole dramatic turn and takes off his hood and all that. And then you see like old Luke Skywalker. Rey holds out the lightsaber to him that she got from the previous scene. And then, it literally ends on a cliffhanger until we get to Last Jedi, but that'll be for another review. But yeah, overall, I think it was like, I know it copies a lot from A New Hope, but I think, what JJ was trying to say is he really wanted to kind of reintegrate the fandom into like what worked with the original Star Wars movies, since it's in a way a direct sequel to Return of the Jedi. So he kind of wanted to reorient people back into the world of Star Wars, because I know like the prequels got a lot of like controversy and a lot of hate, so he kind of wanted to kind of stray away from that and kind of refamiliarize people with like what they loved about the original Star Wars movies and kind of go off from there. All right, and then to wrap all this up, we'll move into Rise of Skywalker. Not only the big finale of the sequel trilogy, but also of the overall Star Wars saga, the whole Skywalker saga as they call it. And like what I was saying beforehand with Force Awakens, J.J. Abrams kind of wanted to make a movie for the fans. So instead of tying up the loose ends of the overall saga and all that, he kind of just wanted to make it more of like I guess a fan tribute rather than something that would logically be the ending to the Skywalker saga, that pays homage to like the prequels and all that stuff as well, instead of just the original trilogy and the sequels. So I mean, I guess like the biggest thing, all the stuff with Last Jedi, he was trying to build Snoke up to be like this kind of amazing character and all that, or like be like the big bad, the puppet master behind all this, to kind of be kind of like this version of the Emperor. But with Last Jedi, Rian Johnson decided to kill off Snoke, which I actually thought was like a really good idea, because for the first movie, for Force Awakens, like I didn't really care for Snoke. Like at first I thought he was going to be this giant monster, dark side lord, and all that, but then we realized it's just a hologram. It's like, okay, it's all good. So the fact that they actually showed him in Last Jedi, kind of like this kind of Hugh Hefner style character with his golden robe and all that, and then Kylo actually killing off Snoke, kind of elevated Kylo Ren's character to make him seem like, oh, he's going to be the new supreme leader of the galaxy, which I thought would have been a really cool choice, where it really would have made it been brought down to Rey versus Kylo, like as these kind of two factions. Because in Last Jedi, unfortunately, Luke Skywalker dies at the very end of that one, which I have my thoughts on that, which I don't agree with, but I'll say that for another video. But yeah, so Luke Skywalker gets killed, and then Rey is now the last Jedi, and then with Snoke being killed, Kylo is the last kind of like dark side user. So now it really comes down to these two different entities going against each other. But then with Rise of Skywalker, the JJ wanted to have the big bad be Palpatine, since Snoke was killed off in the previous movie, and I guess he didn't want Kylo Ren to be kind of like the big bad, big supreme leader, so he kind of wanted to bring Palpatine back into the fold, which I thought could have been cool. Watching that first teaser and then hearing his laughter and all that at the very end of that, it's like, oh cool, they're bringing the Emperor back. I don't know how they're going to do that, but I think it'd be pretty cool. But then right off the bat with the opening crawl, it's like the dead speak, and then from that point it's just like, oh gosh, they're gonna revitalize Palpatine. And I know they have this whole thing with, I guess if you read the comic books, or if you read like the novels, or those kind of like guidebooks or whatever, it's like, oh, they use like dark side science, which Don Monahan's character, who I guess his name is Beaumont, but they never actually say his name, brings up that they use dark science to revitalize Palpatine, how he's a clone, and how after Palpatine died in Return of the Jedi, his spirit was transferred over to this kind of clone body and all that, and which, I mean, I guess it kind of works, but the fact that they have this whole kind of subplot of Palpatine continuing to clone himself in order to move this kind of like decrepit body, his spirit into that one, and he had another clone of himself, which is like his son, and then his son got married, and then they had Rey, so now Rey is revealed to be the daughter of Palpatine, which I mean, I guess I guess I kind of go back and forth on, because I know in Force Awakens, everyone's just like, okay, who is Rey? That's the whole question throughout the whole trilogy. It's like, who is Rey? Is she a Kenobi? Is she a Skywalker? Is she a Palpatine? Which they don't answer in Force Awakens. And it's kind of implied, like, oh, maybe she's like Luke's daughter or something, which I thought would have been kind of cool, kind of go back to like the legends where, Luke meets up with like Mary Jade, and, they have their child and everything, and like, hey, maybe Rey can be Luke's daughter or something, that could be cool, but they decided not to do that. And then it gets revealed in Last Jedi that she's a nobody, which again I thought would have been cool, kind of give Ryan some more credit. Like, I thought that'd been really cool. The fact that, not every character needs to be tied in to a previous character or have some kind of like previous legacy or something. It would have been really cool if like she's just this brand new character. She's just Rey. But then they retcon that in Rise of Skywalker, where Kylo is talking to Rey later on and saying, yeah, I know I told you that that your parents were nobodies, but it was really because they chose to be nobodies, because we have this whole backstory of Palpatine trying to make his son kind of like the next heir to the throne, transfer his spirit into him. But then, his son kind of rejects that and kind of, meets up with Rey's eventual mother. They have their child and everything. They're just trying to live their normal life. But then, they have this other character named Ochi. So then we have Rey's parents finding out about Ochi and then taking her to the planet of Jakku to drop her off and then flying out. But then they get intercepted by Ochi and they get killed by the little dagger that gets kind of like the MacGuffin that kind of gets used throughout the movie. But we'll get to that in a second. And, that kind of starts her whole backstory and stuff. And then the whole thing is like the whole search for Rey, trying to bring her to the dark side and, have her be kind of the heir to the throne and have Palpatine's spirit transferred into her. So that's kind of like the whole mission. In the beginning, the opening action scene where, Kylo, goes to the planet like Mustafar, finds the Wayfinders, they call it, to find the planet of Exegol, where he meets up with Palpatine, who kind of gives him this mission to find Rey, which at first he's like kill the girl and all this will be yours and all this stuff. But, his real mission is to kind of bring Rey to Exegol in order to transfer his spirit onto her. So yeah, I guess, everyone's like double crossing each other, betraying each other. There's all this like infighting within the First Order, with like Admiral Pride going after General Hux, who has this kind of like tension with Kylo Ren, who's the Supreme Leader. I forgot to mention this in Force Awakens, but, I thought he was actually really cool in General Hux was really cool in Force Awakens, kind of like this like young officer who's kind of like this kind of Tarkin type. And, people, I guess, underestimate him because he's so young, but, he really seemed like a force to be reckoned with. But then, Last Jedi, Rian Johnson kind of makes him like an idiot. It was always getting like, your mama jokes and stuff by Poe Dameron, all this stuff. I guess they kind of continue that on to Rise of Skywalker, where he's kind of just like the lackey, always at the gets the short end of the stick, always like the butt of everyone's jokes. I'm just like, oh well, you kind of set him up in Force Awakens to be kind of this cool character, and then you kind of just like make him a punchline. But yeah, so yeah, that's kind of like the whole kind of inciting incident. And as the story goes on, Rey is, training to be the next Jedi, is training with Princess Leia to be a Jedi and everything. And, I guess that's another point, is that this movie was supposed to be about Princess Leia, but Carrie Fisher passed away, unfortunately, and, she couldn't really be, the main character anymore. So they kind of had to use like archival footage and make her kind of this kind of like supporting character. They brought in, Billy D. Williams, as Lando Calrissian, to kind of bring in that kind of like legacy kind of supporting character. So then it kind of really just becomes about like the main three and Chewbacca and C-3PO and BB-8 kind of going on this mission to find the next Wayfinder in order to find the planet of Exegol in order to kill off Palpatine, because they hear this kind of announcement and everything that the dead speak of somehow Palpatine returned and all that. So that's their whole mission, to kind of go after him. So it's kind of like the whole road movie of like the characters going from planet to planet, going to like the desert of Pasana to find the dagger. And they find the dagger, but then they realize that on the inscription of the dagger is like kind of like Sith language, and C-3PO can't read that. Poe has that line. It's like, you can speak 50 million languages, but you can't speak this one. So they have to go to the planet of Kijimi in order to meet up with Babu Frick, who has to kind of like work on his like rewiring in order to read the Sith language. So he reads it, and they realize that it's actually on the Death Star, which is on the oceans of Endor. So they have to go to that planet, and they're like, okay, well, there's the record of the Death Star, but like, where is it? And then, the whole kind of Goonie scene of like Rey holding up the dagger and then pulling out the little arm piece and then lines it up like directly with the ridges of the Death Star, and then the Wayfinder's there. So she goes there, steals a skimmer, kind of goes into the Death Star, which I'm just like, okay, but first of all, how do you know how to pilot a skimmer when you've lived on a desert planet your entire life? But anyway, she gets on to the Death Star, climbs up into like the wreckage, and then kind of goes into like the main throne room, which I thought, was pretty cool, kind of like, and then you kind of hear like the Imperial theme that was played in Return of the Jedi, goes into that little side room, finds the Wayfinder, and then has her confrontation with Kylo Ren, who's like been after her. He takes the Wayfinder, crushes it, and then they have their whole like last lightsaber duel. And then as they're dueling, they realize that Princess Leia passed away, and then they kind of get distracted, Rey, stabs Kylo, and then he falls down to the ground. But then she ends up healing him because now there's Force healing in Star Wars, which kind of gets introduced back when they're in the caves of Pisana, where they have that little high-speed chase after the First Order stormtroopers find them. They fall into the quicksand after they get launched from their ships after the First Order speeders kind of shoot at them, fall into the sands, and then they get into the tunnel, meet up with this giant slug creature, and then Rey sees that there's scratches on him, uses the Force to heal him, and then somehow the slug moves away, and then there's the exit that they need to get out. So, but anyway, Rey feels really guilty about Leia dying and everything, and then she takes Kylo Ren's ride, takes his TIE fighter with the Wayfinder in it, and then kind of goes off to Ahch-To, and she's feeling all like saddened about the fact that she lost Leia, and just doesn't really want to have anything to do with being a Jedi or being a Force. So sets the TIE fighter on fire. She finds a lightsaber, she's about to throw it into the fire. Force Ghost Luke catches it, and it's like, a Jedi's weapon deserves more respect, which is like a callback to Last Jedi, where Rey presents him with the lightsaber, and then he just takes it and throws it behind him. So a little retcon of that scene. So then she's obviously inspired to save the day, because beforehand Kylo Ren revealed the truth halfway through the movie, that she's a Palpatine, and that they're a dyad on the Force, and that if they join with each other, they can destroy Palpatine and rule the galaxy and all that as Reylo. But she wants to have nothing to do with that. She feels guilty that she's a Palpatine. And then earlier on, when they're on Pisana, when Chewbacca was captured by the First Order and taken up to the ship, Rey was trying to use the Force to bring down the ship. Kylo was also using the Force. So you have that kind of Force tug of war scene, and then Rey uses Force lightning and then destroys the ship, and she thinks she kills Chewie. So she thinks she's being pushed towards the dark side, being pushed towards her destiny of joining with Palpatine. So she's obviously all upset about that. So Luke Skywalker, once they're on Ahch-To, trying to encourage her, yes, we knew that you were Palpatine this whole time, but Leia didn't really care about that. She saw your heart, and that that you were pure in spirit and all that. So she decided to train her and all that stuff, so that Rey feels inspired again. She just realized, but I destroyed Kylo's ship, what do I do? And then Luke has that line of you have everything you need, and then which was call back to Last Jedi. She goes into the destroyed TIE fighter and then finds the Wayfinder to go to Exegol. Luke has this whole epic scene of raising the X-Wing finally. That was a callback to Empire Strikes Back. She takes it, goes to Exegol, sends a signal to the rest of the Resistance, to Poe and Finn and all the other crew, to board their ships and then go to Exegol for the final epic battle. So it's very much Return of the Jedi-esque, where Rey finally goes to Exegol and then confronts the Emperor, and then the Resistance, takes all their ships and everything, and then has the attack on the final order with all their Death Star laser equipped Star Destroyers, which they could be used at any time, but I guess it just took decades and decades to assemble all that technology and then put it under the ice of the planet and have that epic kind of rising up out of the ground that was established at the opening of the movie. But anyway, so yeah, they have the whole final battle, and when you think everything's good, Palpatine opens up the ceiling and then uses his lightning to destroy all the ships. And it's tempting Rey. It's if you strike me down, then my spirit will transfer into you, and then you'll be you'll live on. And if you don't do that, then I'll kill all your friends. So she's about to raise the lightsaber to kill him, and then just when all hope seems lost, we cut to Kylo Ren, who actually got onto the planet somehow. And I guess he called his boys, the Knights of Ren or whatever, to pick him up or what, but they never established how he got to the planet. So yeah, he gets to the planet and fights off the Knights of Ren, and then they have their whole Force connection, which is established in Last Jedi, and the whole kind of establishing that you can transfer objects with the Force somehow. So she's about to slay him, puts her hand behind her back, and then does a little magic trick, what's behind my back? Nothing. And then we cut to Kylo Ren with his lightsaber, and he's slaying all the Knights of Ren, who were pointless anyway, and meets up with Rey, who actually has another lightsaber, which was Leia's lightsaber. So then they reunite, they both draw their lightsabers, they're about to take on the Emperor, which would have been really epic, but obviously the Emperor uses his powers and then tries to suck out their life force, and then realizes that they're a dyad in the Force, and then uses the strength of the bond to re-strengthen himself. So now he's back to kind of prequel era Palpatine still with the messed up face, but now he has red robes and all that. So then the Rey and Kylo are knocked out. It's like, as I fell, so too of all the last Skywalker. So he uses the Force on Kylo, gets knocked out, falls off the side, and then Rey's kind of like on the ground, like looking up at all the battle above her, and then she's saying like, be with me, be with me. She's calling out to the past Jedi, which she was trying to connect with at the beginning of the movie, so that she's trying to call out to them again. And I think of the How Should Have Ended video. It's like, well, if Force Ghosts can carry objects, why didn't Rey just like bring a bunch of lightsabers to the Force Ghosts and they can all take on Palpatine? But I know there's this whole thing of like, in China they're very wary about like ghosts in films, so they didn't want to show any Force Ghosts. But they already showed Luke Skywalker's ghost, so what's the problem of showing more Force Ghosts of Jedi? But anyway, so she calls out to them, saying, be with me. And then she has like all the strength to carry on. She stands up and has both lightsabers, and Palpatine's shooting the lightning at her. And she's like, I'm all the Sith. And Rey's holding one lightsaber, and it's like, and I am all the Jedi. Like, it's trying to copy Avengers Endgame with like, I am inevitable, I am Iron Man. So gets her both lightsabers out. The Force lightning's shot back on Palpatine because I guess he didn't learn his lesson from Revenge of the Sith about the fact that I guess lightsabers can deflect lightning and shoot it back at them, but he keeps shooting it. I guess once it gets going, he can't stop, so he gets destroyed. The acolytes get destroyed, and then the battle is won. Rey's knocked out. The Resistance takes out the biggest ship. Finn and Janna use their little grenades and toss it into the ship. The Death Star technology gets destroyed, and they get rescued by Lando. Comes at the last minute, another little Endgame reference where all hope seems lost. You think like the First Order's gonna win. They're destroying all the X-wings, and then Poe's like, I'm sorry, I really thought we had a shot, but there's just too few of us. And then Lando comes in and is like, on your left. No, he says, it's like, oh, there are more of us, Poe, there are more of us. And then has this whole armada, going after them. And then it's like really much like Endgame with all the superheroes going after Thanos' army. Now it's all the people from around the galaxy gathering up to destroy the First Order and all that. So then all the battle is won. Rey's kind of like left there limping. And then Kylo, the rise of Skywalker rises up from the crevice and then pulls her up. He transfers his life force energy to her. She wakes up. They have their little kiss. All the Reylo fans are happy about that, and which I didn't really care for. So Ben dies, joins the Force, and then Rey reunites with all the heroes back on the Resistance planet, and then everything's happily ever after. And then until we get like the final scene where Rey goes back to the homestead, which I actually thought was a really cool sequence of like, literally shot for shot of like, A New Hope with like Luke Skywalker around the homestead. But then you get to the very end where, she bears lightsabers, which I thought was fine. And then this random desert woman with the little space camel. It's like, there's been no one for so long. Who are you? I'm Rey. Rey who? Has a big dramatic moment looking off into the distance and seeing Forrest, Luke, and Leia. And then having a smile, and she's like, Rey Skywalker. And yeah, and we just ended from there. BB-8 rolls next to her. They look into the twin sunsets, and yeah, that's the end of the Skywalker saga. It was definitely, overall, it's just like a letdown. I mean, there's definitely a lot of factors going into it. The fact that J.J. Abrams had his own vision of where he wanted the sequel trilogy to go at the end of Force Awakens, but then Rian Johnson came in and had a sharp left turn and had all these changes and stuff, so he kind of had to work with that instead of taking the changes that Rian Johnson made and kind of going with that. He's like, no, I need to bring it back to those storylines that I had from Force Awakens and bring it back to like what I was trying to set up with my storyline. So I think that was definitely a detriment. Apparently he met up with Rian Johnson and Rian told him about all the changes he wanted, and I guess JJ really liked the fact that Kylo killed off Snoke, and it didn't really have to kind of echo the beats of the original trilogy and everything, but I guess he changed his mind at the last minute and had to bring the Emperor back in. And I mean, there were also other circumstances of like Carrie Fisher passing away, because I know she was supposed to be like the main character of episode 9, but they couldn't do that, so they had to have like archival footage for her sprinkled in and have it be more about the trio instead, and then maybe bring in Lando for a couple scenes, C-3PO and Chewbacca and all these legacy characters and stuff. But they really kind of just did the best they could, trying to wrap things up and trying to make it as satisfying as possible. But in the end, you kind of have these two factions: people who like love Force Awakens, hate Last Jedi, and people who like love Last Jedi and hate Force Awakens. And you kind of upset both factions. So honestly, I gotta give JJ, as much credit as he can, just because, it was definitely gonna be an impossible task either way. Just trying to wrap up not only like this movie, just make this a satisfying movie, but also wrap up the new trilogy and the overall Skywalker saga. But I mean, honestly, they kind of put themselves in this situation, Disney and JJ, just by not having a plan early on. Not only not having a plan early on, but also not using George Lucas's original notes for the sequel trilogy and everything. So they just gotta make that money. Gotta make good on their $4.5 billion investment and crank out as many movies as possible. But hey, I mean, the movie made $1 billion. Force Awakens made $2 billion. So I mean, they got their money back, but yeah, that kind of brought an end to the Star Wars movies moving forward, at least until we get the Taika Waititi movie, whenever that decides to drop. But yeah, it's kind of a shame that this was kind of like the downer ending to this kind of Skywalker saga and this whole kind of like the Disney Star Wars movies and stuff like that. But yeah, well, hey, what can you do? And that's the video. Thank you so much for watching and kind of bearing with me as I kind of rant and rave, especially about the Star Wars movies, but just kind of shows my passion about Star Wars and kind of what obsessed me about the changes that J.J. Abrams made to the whole Skywalker saga, and especially with Force Awakens and especially with Rise of Skywalker. But I think overall he's a very, very talented filmmaker, and I don't think there's really any other movies like that he's working on right now. I think he's more doing like the producer role right now and like getting kind of other projects established. But yeah, I mean, I wish him all the best of luck. He kind of got bombarded with just all these impossible tasks of like Disney and Star Wars and all these franchises and stuff like that. So, and he didn't even want to direct Rise of Skywalker. Like he was just wanting to maybe like produce and maybe be like a writing consultant or something. But after Colin Trevorrow got fired after the failure of like Book of Henry, they brought J.J. Abrams back on to do episode 9. So even he was kind of like resistant to do it. So I guess you can kind of feel that tension as you watch Rise of Skywalker and all that, and just the pressure that Disney and Lucasfilm and Kathleen Kennedy and Bob Iger put on him to kind of like make it as good as it can, like just wrap everything up. But so yeah, I don't blame him at all. I think he's a great filmmaker. I'm excited to see like whatever he does in the future, and yeah, I'm hoping that everything's all good. And again, thank you so much for watching. Be sure to give this video a like and subscribe for more videos. And if you'd like to see me take on more filmmakers, let me know in the comments below. Maybe I'll do like John Watts and do like Spider-Man Home trilogy, or do Christopher Nolan, do like a Dark Knight trilogy. So if you'd like to see that, be sure to let me know below, and I'll see you next time. May the Force be with you always, and live long and prosper.